When you think of the British Empire, you probably picture red-coated soldiers and a navy that ruled the waves. But you know what? That's only half the story. The weapon that really built the largest empire in history wasn't steel. It was something way more subtle and honestly a lot more powerful.
See, the real story of the British Empire isn't just about conquest. It's a story about a financial revolution. It's about how a nation, basically on the verge of going broke, figured out how to use debt as a weapon to dominate the entire globe.
Now, to really get this, we've got to go back to the late 1600s. And the first thing you need to understand is that England was absolutely not a superpower. In fact, it was kind of a mess. So on one side, you had these titans of the age. The Dutch, they were the undisputed masters of global finance. France was the military juggernaut of Europe. And then there was England. Broke, politically unstable, and with a credit reputation so bad that honestly, nobody in their right mind would lend them a penny. And if you don't have cash, you can't build ships or pay soldiers. By all accounts, England should have been just a footnote in history.
But you know, desperation can lead to some pretty creative thinking. England was facing a huge war with France, and the royal piggy bank was completely empty. So the government made a move that would literally change the course of history. England was totally cornered. So in 1694, Parliament greenlit this really radical plan. A group of private investors would lend the government £1.2 million. Okay, fine. But here's the revolutionary part. In exchange, they wouldn't just get interest payments. Oh no, they would get a charter to create a brand new national institution, the Bank of England. And its whole purpose was to manage the government's debt forever.
By doing this, they pretty much invented a new kind of money. This wasn't just another loan to a king who might, decide not to pay it back. This was debt that was backed by the full faith and credit of the entire nation, guaranteed by taxes collected in the future. All of a sudden, government debt became this secure, tradable thing, a government bond. And because it was reliable, it unleashed this flood of cash that had been hiding under mattresses all over the country. And with this new financial engine humming, Britain was no longer fighting with one hand tied behind its back. It could suddenly fund wars on a scale its rivals couldn't even dream of. Every conflict just became a financial endurance race. And this right here was Britain's new superpower in action. Because its debt was now seen as super safe, it could borrow huge amounts of money at incredibly low interest rates. France, on the other hand, had to pay these cripplingly high rates to anyone who was brave enough to lend to its constantly defaulting monarchy. Wars weren't just fought on the battlefield anymore, they were contests of credit. And frankly, it was a financial fight France was always going to lose. This advantage kicked off this incredible, unstoppable feedback loop. Step 1, Britain borrows money cheaply to fund a war. Step 2, a military victory gets them new colonies and new trade routes. Step 3, the profits from all that new trade, think sugar, tea, you name it, flow back to London. Step 4, that money easily pays the interest owed to the bondholders. And what does that do? It makes British credit look even more secure, which means the government can borrow even more money for the next war. Borrow, conquer, profit, and repeat. That was the engine that powered the whole empire. And nobody, and I mean nobody, perfected this machine better than the East India Company. It was technically a private corporation, but it acted like a government. It used money from investors to raise its own private armies. It conquered huge territories like India, and then it funneled all those massive profits back to its shareholders in London. It was the ultimate mix of credit and conquest.
But we have to talk about the other side of this, because for every pound sterling of profit that was written down in a London ledger, there was a devastating price being paid somewhere else. The brutal efficiency of this financial machine was fueled by ruthless, cold-hearted exploitation.
I mean, the cold logic of the system is just laid bare right here. Look at China. Britain had a trade deficit because it was buying so much tea. The solution? Get millions of Chinese people addicted to opium to balance the books, and then launch 2 wars to make sure the drugs kept flowing. Or India. The pressure to pay back investors meant exporting grain for profit, even while millions of people starved to death in man-made famines. From London's point of view, these people were just numbers on the wrong side of a balance sheet. The empire's financial model was incredibly effective, there's no denying that. But it ran on a terrible moral calculation, where entire populations were basically considered expendable in the hunt for profit for investors who are half a world away. Now, you might think this is all ancient history, but this system didn't just disappear when the British Empire fell. In fact, it became the blueprint for the entire modern global financial system. The world we live in today still runs on these same principles.
What's really wild is that these ideas, which were so radical back in the 1700s, are now just how the world works. The idea that a nation is permanently in debt? Normal. A central bank managing that debt? Of course. Funding wars by selling bonds? Standard procedure. Having one currency that dominates global trade? All of it. These were all pioneered by Britain as tools to build its empire.
After being pretty much bankrupted by 2 world wars, Britain essentially passed the torch to the United States. The center of financial gravity moved from London to Wall Street, and the British pound was replaced by the US dollar. But the underlying operating system, that fusion of national debt, central banking, and global power, it stayed exactly the same.
And all of this leaves us with a really big question for our own time. When nations can borrow trillions of dollars in a heartbeat, and when the decisions of a few bond investors can make or break an entire country's economy, who's really in charge? The system that funded the British Empire is more powerful than it has ever been. The names on the door have changed, but the machine itself, it just keeps running.